Leon Draisaitl isn't just Connor McDavid's running mate. He's one of the best players in the world, a Hart winner, one of the best playoff performers in the league, and in my opinion, the most overlooked superstar in the NHL today. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I just wrapped up my third, and this will be my fourth season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to make a case as to why I think Leon Draisaitl doesn't get the respect he deserves. Obviously, anytime you're the teammate of an all-time great like Connor McDavid, there is going to be addendums to your ledger, but I think Leon has firmly cemented himself as one of the greats of this era, and we're going to make that case today. So we're going to start our show by just talking about the narrative at large, the counting stats, what they say about the player. As we move on, we'll talk a little bit more about why playing with another star is such a challenge. We'll talk about Leon's playoff clutchness, and of course, we will hit on some of my personal favorite Draisaitl moments. So to start things out, I think we see this quite a bit, actually, and I think it's really a byproduct of everyone having fried attention spans. And look, I am as guilty as anybody. I love me some TikTok. I love me some short form media. I love to read social. I spend entirely too much time nuking my attention span. I am constantly playing video games and listening to music or scrolling through TikTok while sports are on TV. And I am guilty of it. I know. But at the same time, I try and fight back against that. I make sure to read a little bit every day, read from a physical paper book, put my phone down, go on Do Not Disturb for a while, and try and actually use my brain, exercise it a little bit, journal a little bit, make my brain work. And we can have our gum. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I was going to say have our cake and eat it too, but same principle. We are capable of recognizing greatness. Greatness, though finite, because every individual player is great in their own way, two great players being on the same team does not make one less great. I think a great example of this, and I've talked about this ad nauseum over the years, when the NHL did that NHL 100 project in the late part of last decade, I think it was 2016-17 was the season where they did the 100 greatest players of the NHL for the first 100 years as a league. Evgeni Malkin didn't crack the top 100. Evgeni Malkin was the best player in the NHL from like 2009 to 2012 during that window where Sidney Crosby was dealing with the various concussion issues that were hindering his ability to play. Malkin is one of the best hockey players I've ever seen. And look, yes, am I biased towards the present window because this is the era I live in? Do I particularly take guys pre-expansion seriously? No, I don't. I don't take a lot of guys pre-1980 seriously when we're talking about the all-time greats because the game is so different. Sure, you can make an argument that physical talent will translate regardless of generation, but I do think the fact that the game is faster and more skilled than ever in today's game makes it all the more impressive to watch guys like Malkin, like Draisaitl. I think another example of this is Jonathan Toews in respect to Patrick Kane. I don't think a lot of people understand just how good Jonathan Toews, and to a lesser extent, I would put Duncan Keith in there as well, somebody who was a really great player for an extended period of time. But I do think we see this, and this isn't unique to hockey. We see this quite often in basketball where two superstars on the same team can split the vote in an all-star vote, in a MVP voting situation. I think we see this from time to time in football as well, where, well, is the wide receiver great or is the quarterback throwing him the ball what makes him great? And I think sometimes it's easy to see the difference where if you have your not starting quarterback like Justin Jefferson on the Vikings a couple years ago when Kirk Cousins blew out his Achilles, and they had a litany of guys like Josh Dobbs, veteran backups, guys, not really proven track record guys, but Justin Jefferson still an elite offensive player in spite of that. I don't think there's a great way to distill that out in terms of hockey where we talk about, well, who's the straw that stirs the drink, to talk about Reggie Jackson and Thurman Munson from back in the day. If you know what I'm talking about, I know that's an older reference, but in the context of the Oilers, in the context of the present day NHL, Leon Draisaitl was arguably the best player in hockey last year. I think he was undoubtedly the best skater in hockey last year. And look, I know Connor Hellebuyck won the MVP. I do think Draisaitl had a better season. I think he was more important to the Oilers' success. You look at their splits without Draisaitl on the ice. You look at the impact he had on guys like Vasily Podkolzin, Kasperi Kapanen, the way he was able to elevate the talent around him. And look, if we're going just on counting stats, he already has probably a Hall of Fame resume, if we're going to be honest. Just in terms of the Oilers, he's 4th all-time in goals. He's 5th all-time in assists. He's 5th all-time in points. He is tied for the most game-winning goals in franchise history. I think there's a strong case he's going to end up top 2 in basically every single, or 3 in every single one of those categories, depending on how long he plays, depending on how long, if Connor McDavid stays an Oiler, how long McDavid plays. I do think there's a chance McDavid can run down Gretzky for Oilers points. Obviously not all-time points. That would be crazy. Look, if McDavid could get to that 2,800 point threshold that Gretzky's at, I don't think anybody's ever sniffing that again. I just think the game is too different. I think the defense is too good. I think the goalies are too good. But you look at where Draisaitl's at, 140 points in 90-something career playoff games, one of the best playoff performers of this era. You think about that series he had a couple years ago against the Kings and subsequently against the Flames on effectively one leg where he was still averaging over a point per game. It was truly one of the more remarkable, gutsy performances I can recall. And this is a guy who, up until he won that MVP in 2020, and even after that, had guys slandering him, had people saying, well, he's not that good. He gets so many points on the power play with McDavid. How good is he really? I think last year solidified what I've held for a while now is my opinion, but Draisaitl is every bit as important to the Oilers' success. And look, I don't think you're going to get an argument from anyone, including me, that he's better than Connor McDavid or he's on the same tier. I think McDavid is on his own level. I think Draisaitl's right there with McKinnon and Austin Matthews for the 2nd or 3rd best player in the world. I think after last year, and I got to start working on my NHL 100 project for 2025, 2026. I started doing the preliminary research and starting to put together a baseline for my rankings. But I think to start the year, I'm probably going to have Draisaitl at 3 behind McDavid and Nathan McKinnon. But this is undoubtedly one of the best in the world. This is someone who makes his line mates better, who plays an integral role, who frankly gets more out of McDavid. I think as great as McDavid is, and I think we all can understand this, I think we all understand that Draisaitl unlocks another gear for McDavid, that he opens up more space, that he makes defenses, especially when we're talking about penalty kills, respect him more. You look at the work that McDavid and Draisaitl were able to do in these playoffs with Corey Perry on the first line, especially in the conference final, the Stanley Cup final, where those two guys were pounding the drum. Yeah, we want Perry, we want Perry, we want Perry. And it takes a lot to make a guy like Perry work in today's NHL, where the skating just isn't where you would like it to be, to play a first line and an important role. But what makes Leon so great, and what we're going to take our first break in a second here, so I don't want to get too far into a point, but when you have a guy that is arguably a better playmaker than a goal scorer lead the league in goals, I think that tells you a lot about how gifted he is and how resourceful he is as a player to make himself useful. But we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to explain why playing with another star sometimes isn't all it's cracked up to be, coming up next. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal chief financial officer to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you're not just managing your money, you can build real wealth. Something I am definitely guilty of as a younger person. Not putting enough money aside for bigger purchases, not financing things, planning ahead. Once I subscribed to Monarch, I set up reasonable medium-term goals, paid off my vacation, which frankly, I cannot wait to go to Ireland. That's coming up real soon. So if you yourself are ready to take control of your finances, you need to visit Monarch Money today. day. And if you use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com, you'll get 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year subscription. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're breaking down why Leon Draisaitl is underappreciated and underrespected. And I opened with this idea, but I do want to reiterate this. We're all guilty of this of some degree. Some of us, and me included, to emphasize how good someone is, we often feel the need to put the other one down. You can admire and respect gifted players on the same team, and praising one doesn't necessarily denigrate or minimize the other. I said it before, and I'll repeat it right now. McDavid's the best player in the world. I really don't see an argument. Look, I'm sure there are some Nathan McKinnon Avs dead enders. There might be, I doubt it after last year, some Austin Matthews dead enders. But for my money, the marriage of counting stat production, the high end dynamic ability that no other player in the world has, McDavid is the best hockey player in the world. And anytime you get to play with one of those guys, people don't take you seriously. They weigh your offense. They put it on a scale. And look, I emphasize this a lot. Context does matter. I think how players put together their offense, how they put together their stats, I think that tells you an awful lot about them. But we saw it last year. Leon Draisaitl last season put together one of the great seasons in the entire league and largely did it with less than ideal supporting cast members, doing it a lot, frankly, with forwards who aren't that individually talented. And again, that's not to say they're bad. There are guys who are good at one thing, who have one component. Last year in the regular season, most commonly deployed Draisaitl with Hyman and McDavid. And we talked about that quite a bit throughout the course of the season. Everydayers heard me say it a lot. The Oilers had to go to that more last year because they were a little more desperate. Because they lacked maybe some of the depth they had the year before, they felt the need to break out old reliable like SpongeBob and the jellyfishing net quite a bit more often than they needed to the year before because the depth wasn't there. But you go past that, after that, and it's 268 minutes for Draisaitl, Hyman, McDavid. They outscored opponents 28-10. Next up after that, Draisaitl with Victor Arvidsson and Vasily Podkolzin, they outscored opponents 14-9. Just remarkable, really strong results. After that, when you get to 5-on-5, Draisaitl, Kapanen, Podkolzin, 3 goals for, 3 goals against in 85 minutes. Again, that's not a huge sample, but when you talk about it in the context of counting stat production, in the context of results, to get 50% goal share with Podkolzin, who remember, before last year, was playing 10 minutes per game on a bad Canucks team. Somebody who, and look, I don't think it's an insane suggestion to say that if last year didn't go well, Podkolzin very well could have been out of the NHL. Podkolzin could have gone back to Russia. He could have gone to one of the European leagues. He could have got sent to the AHL. But because he was able to forge a connection with Draisaitl and Chris and really, frankly, earn Chris Knobloch's trust, he earned himself that role. And we've talked about that quite a bit this offseason so far, the idea of, well, can Matthew Savoie, can Ike Howard, can Andrew Mangiapane, can 2 of those 3 guys play their way into top 6 winger roles based on their skill sets, based on what the responsibilities associated with those roles are? And I think there's an argument, yes. And look, we're going to get back to Leon in a second here, but this is a relevant aside. It is not easy to play with great players. We have seen, and I know a lot of people think, well, good players make everyone else around them better. Yes, of course. The more dangerous an offensive player you are, the more you're going to be able to open up for your opponents. And Kapanen and Podkolzin are a great example of that. Neither of those guys is a top 6 forward. I have no reservations or hesitations in saying that. Kapanen put on waivers, Podkolzin a salary dump throw-in. That is a those are players who recognize the opportunity that was there in playing with Draisaitl. Hell, I said it. I said it during the season. I said it, I want to say sometime in November when Kapanen had been on the team for a month or so. He earned himself another year in the NHL. Anytime you get put on waivers, you're at that point, late 20s, early 30s, where you haven't been consistently a counting stats guy. You haven't really carved a role out for yourself after your initial draft wave. If a team like Edmonton, that's a Stanley Cup contender, gives you 50 to 60 regular season games and gives you ice time with one of their best players, they see something in you. And that's a validation of your talent because that's going to keep you around. Because even if you can't crack the lineup for a contender, a bad team is going to look at you and say, well, if Edmonton gave him 50 games and let him play with Draisaitl, there's got to be something there. And yeah, sometimes that does lead you to bad decisions. Sometimes that leads you to decision makers choosing to opt for that endorsement as opposed to maybe some production. And neither Kapanen nor Podkolzin lit the world on fire counting stats wise. You know, we talked about it, 3 goals for, 3 goals against in 80 some odd minutes as a trio. But the results were good. The possession was good. And Draisaitl, to his credit, showed you he can drive a line by himself. He is not just a product of McDavid. And I like to think of these superstar duos as being conduits that feed energy back and forth to each other. That Connor is so dangerous because he can get to anywhere on the ice with his skating. He can pass the puck anywhere he needs to. And he's an above average shooter. For Leon, he's an elite shooter. He's an elite playmaker. He's an above average skater. He has a physical component to his game. You have those two entities to play off of each other, to create off of each other, to frankly use each other. It opens up so many opportunities. It's why you can play Corey Perry in the top 6, why you can play Arvidsson. Hell, the Oilers are going into next season uncertain what Zach Hyman's going to be able to do, at least for the first month or so of the season. We don't know if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is washed or not. I think he's probably on the decline, though I'm inclined to say he might be a little bit better than he was last year. And then it's question marks. Is it Podkolzin? Is it Savoie? Is it Howard? Is it Henrique? Is it Nuge? There are so many. Is it Trent Frederick? Is it David Tomasek? There are so many potential players who could play their way into a top 6 role. And we all know there's a reasonable chance it'll be fine because Leon's that good. Leon led the league in goals as the most dangerous player on the line with 2 guys who were fringe NHLers going into last season. Hell, one of them was on waivers. And look, I know Kapanen didn't play all of his, Draisaitl didn't play all of his minutes with Kapanen, but if you are that good, if defenses know you're most likely to be the dangerous player when you're out there, they're going to cue in on you. They're going to try and take away your angles. They're going to try and take away your shots. And it didn't really matter. And yeah, of course, he's great on the power play. And as much as power play gets denigrated in the context of how good a team is, the Oilers, that's part of their recipe, is having an elite power play, and having 2 of the 4 or 5 best players in the world on the same unit unlocks a degree of high ceiling that most teams can't. And look, was the power play as good last year? No, we all know the power play needs to be better going forward if the Oilers are going to be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender going forward. But I struggle to bet against Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, and Evan Bouchard because I don't think there's another team in the NHL that can match that 1-2-3 on a special teams unit. Sure, there are teams that are close that I like. Nothing is as good as this. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we return, we're going to talk about Leon's playoff performances and some of my favorite Draisaitl moments coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we walk through just why Leon Draisaitl is underappreciated at large. And look, I know Oiler fans know how good Leon is. I know for the most part, if you're listening to this, you're in the same boat as me. You have the unquestioned privilege of watching one of the game's best players cook on a nightly basis. I don't think people understand just how special a talent Leon Draisaitl is if you don't watch him frequently. And when you think about it in the context of the league over the last 10 years or so, I don't think Leon gets his credit. When you think about it in the context of the NHL at large, and we are living in an extremely diluted talent pool with 32 teams, with 82 games, there are way too many opportunities for good players and good teams to beat up on the bad ones. There are so many mediocre entities out there that are just going through the motions, who they get off the bus that first day in October, and they know they're not even in the mix for a playoff spot, let alone winning the Stanley Cup. And teams like that get beat up on. It is an opportunity for the Stars to pad their counting stats, to put up 4 and 5 point nights, and to look special. But when all is said and done, nobody's going through the individual box scores. 15 years from now, when Leon and Connor are both in the Hockey Hall of Fame, they're going to see Draisaitl's got the third most points of any player since 2015, and he's played 900. He has 956 points in 790 games since 2014-15. That doesn't count his rookie season, but that's the first season McDavid played in the NHL, and he, of course, only played 40-some-odd games that rookie season. McDavid's over 1,082 points in 712 career games. Just again, for context, to get to Gretzky, he'd have to keep this pace up for like another 15 to 20 seasons, which I love Connor to death. I don't think he's going to play till he's 45, or he's going to start averaging 160, 170 point seasons. But for my money, and I gave this take the other day when I was talking with my friends over the weekend, and they were a little surprised I said it, but when all is said and done, when the careers are over, when we're comparing Leon to Pavel Bure, the Sedin twins, Daniel Alfredson, Henrik Lundqvist, Borin Salming, William Nylander, I think I have Sergei Fedorov, of course, Nick Lidstrom, Peter Forsberg. Now I'm just naming guys, but Dudes Rock, it's fun to name random athletes. But I think when all is said and done, Draisaitl's going to have a strong argument that he's the best European-born hockey player ever. And that might sound a bit jarring. That might sound a little bit hyperbolic. But when you look at the numbers, I mean, Nikita Kucherov is one of the two players ahead of Draisaitl in points since 2014-15. I think Kucherov is undoubtedly one of the best players of this era, but he's a winger. His defense isn't as good. Granted, he's won 2 Stanley Cups. He has won a Hart Trophy. He has a slightly more decorated resume. But at the same time, Draisaitl does a lot more. Nikita Kucherov has gotten to play with Braden Point, with Steven Stamkos. And look, of course, Leon's gotten to play with Connor a whole lot, especially on the power play over the years, and especially during that down period when after they made the playoffs in 2016-17 and lost to the Ducks, they were playing a whole lot together in 2018, 19, and 20 because the team just didn't have the guys. And as great as Connor and Leon are, and I have been singing their praises for this entire episode, they can't do it alone. And the Oilers finding Evan Bouchard, trading for Matthias Ekholm, signing Zach Hyman, all of these pieces to unlock more. And that's your goal. Because the great inefficiency in today's NHL, and my everydayers have heard me say this a ton, especially in the offseason, as we've talked about Evan Bouchard's extension, we've talked about a hypothetical McDavid extension, there is so much value in having a superstar because the superstars in today's game are underpaid relative to their value. If there was no salary cap, if players could command whatever they were worth, Connor McDavid would be worth more than $20 million. So would Nathan McKinnon. So would Cale Makar. So would Quinn Hughes. So would Leon Draisaitl. So would Connor Hellebuck. So would Igor Shesterkin. But because the salary cap has been flat or limited growth for so long, these guys' values are depressed. And I know Draisaitl's number is a little bit of sticker shock, $14 million. It's a lot of money. It's one of the highest paid numbers we're ever going to see in the NHL. As time goes on, it'll become more palatable. 5 years from now into that 8-year deal, it's going to look a lot cheaper. 5 years from now, that $14 million per year is going to look like $7 or $8 million in today's NHL. That is a golden opportunity. And look, there will eventually become a point where Leon does start to have a physical decline, where he's going to have less explosive burst, where he's not going to have the energy to be as engaged, to make as good of plays as you would like him to. But you are watching one of the best hockey players any of us will ever see on a consistent basis, and getting to watch him play with one of his best friends, with somebody who is one of the best hockey players we have ever seen. And yes, I love that they're friends. I love that they play so well off of each other, that they have that innate companionship, understanding of how each other plays, so that there's really kind of a sixth sense, a connection there, a synergy that you can't really fugazi. You can't make that up. And we watch it. It happens. Sometimes great players don't gel well together because of what they're good at. It doesn't line up because some are so puck dominant, because some aren't as good of facilitators as they need to be. Leon is arguably the best playmaker in the NHL. He also has the capacity to be the best scorer in the NHL. He says it himself. He thinks of himself more as a playmaker than a goal scorer, but because the team needs him to score goals, he scores goals and he leads the league in goals. Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds in the abstract if we were talking about an average player? You know, if someone like Blake Coleman said, well, the team needed me to score more goals, so I led the league in goals? Come on. I cannot emphasize enough how special of a hockey player Leon Draisaitl is. He's one of the best I've ever seen, I think. And my favorite thing about Leon is how, I don't want to say goofy, but how quirky he is. I really enjoy how he's not afraid to stand up for himself, especially when it comes to dealing with parts of the media that are a little, I don't want to say rancorous, but just not friendly for no real reason either. Like, this is one of the best players in the world. You're asking him awful questions. I appreciate Leon telling people who aren't doing a good job to ask better questions. And frankly, and real quick, this playoff run was magic. 3 overtime game winners in the same postseason is insane. That was a record. And I am ecstatic that Leon is under contract for what will likely be the rest of his prime and into the decline of his prime. But I think there's a strong chance that Leon plays another contract after this one. I think, especially if he's maybe in shouting distance of some of the Oiler franchise records, if McDavid is still here, which I do assume will happen. We did talk about that quite a bit last week over a couple of episodes, the everydayers know. I really do think Leon's going to have a strong chance to finish second or third in pretty much every single one of these Oilers team categories. It'll just simply be a matter of how much longer he, McDavid both play as Oilers, and if they can get in shouting distance of Gretzky and some of the more ridiculous ones, because some of these Gretzky numbers are just preposterous. And look, it's a different NHL. The quality of player, the style of game, it's different. What Gretzky did then probably wouldn't work now. He would have had to adapt his game a little bit more. But make no mistake about it. When we do the NHL 125 or 150, Leon Draisaitl is going to be there. Evgeni Malkin should too, but that's a different conversation for a different podcast. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you so much to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. If you could be so kind, please be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night over on the Locked On NHL feeds over on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On Oilers. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe over on YouTube. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Till then, let's go Oilers.